Okay, so section 3.3 and 3.4 of module 3 are looking at time and keeping track of time specifically, as well as time cards. So we're going to start with 3.3, which is keeping track of time. This one might seem really basic. It may also be different than how you count hours and minutes and such. But however you do it is fine. I'm going to show you a standardized way that I would hope that you would do it. And as long as you're getting the right answers, though, obviously I don't mind how you count. So when an employee, so if you're being paid hourly, usually you're going to get paid by the hour and then down to the quarter of the hour. So the quarter hour, they don't pay you by the minute, okay? But it's important to be able to make sure that what you are being paid and what you're supposed to be paid match up. And if you can't, so let me just get this in there, quarter hour, not the minute. So you want to make sure that what you're being paid and what you're supposed to be paid match up. And this is just bearing in mind that an hour is going to have 60 minutes in it, and quarters are each 15 minutes, right? So that would be because 4 times 15 equals 60. So when we're talking about the 15-minute intervals, we can actually put them all into fractions, which I know nobody likes, but this is going to make it easier to turn them into a standardized decimal system, okay? And a lot of times people think that 15 minutes, or they accidentally in their head, they'll think 15 minutes is equal to, when you're dealing with time, they'll say 15 minutes is equal to 0.15 of an hour. That is not true, okay? We do not want this. So this is how we can kind of go around that. So if we're looking at 15 minutes, that's actually 15 minutes out of a total of 60, right? We're not looking out of 100 right now, we're looking out of a total of 60. And if we go to reduce that fraction, we can divide the top and bottom by 15, okay? And that's going to give us 1 out of 4 as our fraction, or 0.25, okay? So this is actually what a quarter of an hour looks like if we're using what we're going to call decimal notation. So 0.25 hours. 30 minutes, you guys can probably see where this is going. 30 minutes, if we divide it by 15 twice, we're going to end up with 1/2 of an hour. Okay, so we know 30 minutes is a half hour, or 0.5. Okay, so that's how we turn 30 minutes into a decimal notation, and 45 minutes is gonna reduce down to 3/4 of an hour, okay, or 0.75. So when you're looking at 15-minute intervals, these are the decimal notations you want to use. You do not want to start accidentally putting just like 0.45, 0.30. That's not right, okay? So get this part into your head. Again, I've put it here. I'll highlight it for the sake of reinforcement. 15 minutes does not equal 0.15 hours, all right? And we're going to be dealing with a lot of times and like adding up times, like for instance, a week's worth of shifts. So for this, it might seem obvious the first, just if you're looking at it individually, but when you've got a lot of different shifts to look at, it sometimes gets confusing. So I'm going to repeat this a couple times, even if it seems unnecessary. Okay, so our first example, add 1.5 hours, and these are going to sometimes be reading questions. So I suggest if this printed, you print it, or if you're writing the questions down on another piece of paper, you write down this information. So 1.5 hours to 1 3/4 hours, okay? So we've got 1.5 and 1 3/4. Now, those are fractions, and they want us to add them using both clock notation, okay? So clock notation and decimal notation, we're going to look at the 2 different ways of doing it. So I'm going to split my page in half here. So the first way we would do it, if we're looking at clock notation, oh, that's really not very nice, is it, Miss K? Okay, I'm just going to erase this and make it nicer. hopefully make it nice. Clock. Okay, clock notation. So if we're looking at clock notation, 1.5 hours would be, that's 1 hour, right? And a half is 30 minutes. So this is your 1 hour. And again, I'm posting all of the filled in notes with this, with actual handwriting. So if you can't read what I'm writing, that's all good. They will be posted in hopefully a bit clearer. So 1 hour and 30 minutes to 1 3/4 of an hour. So we're going to add that to 1 3/4. We know 3/4 is 45 minutes of an hour. Now if we just add these up, so 1 plus 1 is 2, 30 plus 45, we end up with 75. Now this is a problem because that's more than an hour, right? That's actually 1 hour and 15 minutes. So this can't be our final answer. We have to take that hour out and we need to add it to our 2 hours, right? So now we've got 3 hours and then we have this 15 minutes left over. Okay, I'm not going to keep drawing arrows because that's going to get confusing, but we have that 15 minutes left over, so 3 hours and 15 minutes. That would be our answer, okay? But as you can see, things can get a little possibly confusing here because you can't have more than 60 minutes in an hour. Now, if we're using decimal notation, and decimal notation is going to be the one that I suggest going forward you always use. Even if you have to, in your head, if you want to go for 1.5 hours, if you want to write it down like this first, and then change it into decimals before you add everything up, because when you change things into decimals, it just automatically accounts for the fact that there can only be 60 minutes in an hour, and you don't have to do this sort of like pulling out the fact that there's an hour and 15 minutes in here. Okay, so decimal notation, an hour, 1.5 hours would be 1.5, right? And 1 3/4 of an hour. We know that 3/4, we kind of did that right up there. I'll scroll up just a little bit if I can here. So there was our 3/4 of an hour. All right, so scroll back down, 1.75. All right, now, if you're adding up decimals, and you can use a calculator, okay? Obviously, you always can use a calculator. You don't have to do this in your head. But if you use a calculator or you do this in your head, 0 plus 5, right, is 5. 5 plus 7. So what's that going to give us? That is going to give us 12. Carry the 1, put our decimal down, and 3. So that's 3.25, okay? So our answer would be 3.25 hours. And that's also correct, right? Because 0.25 hours is equal to 15 minutes. So the 15 minutes that we have here is accounted for right away by the 0.25, and the 3 hours gets immediately calculated properly. And if you do this in a calculator, it'll give you the same answer. So this is the way that I would really prefer you, if you're thinking of a way to do it, I'd prefer you do it this way. You'll notice that I again wrote at the bottom that I strongly recommend you always decide to use decimal notation. Strong recommendation. Just makes it easier, okay? But of course you're allowed to do whatever makes most sense for you, and if you're getting the right answers, I certainly won't be questioning you. So, moving on, if we're thinking about elapsed time, so something called elapsed time, so let's say your shift starts at 8:30, ends at 5. Oh my goodness, I accidentally opened my Apple. I don't want iTunes. Sorry guys. I don't know what they want me to agree or disagree to, so I'm just gonna, ow! Exit. Okay, there we go. Sorry, back to elapsed time. So if you're working, let's say, a 9 to 5 shift, how many hours have you actually worked? That's what we're talking about in terms of elapsed time. So in our first example, and the easiest way to do it, and I still do this, is on your fingers, okay? So you put your starting time in your brain, and then You can make a fist and put up a finger for each hour that passes, or you can tap a finger for each hour that passes, however you want to do that. This is a really poor highlight job. There we go. So however you want to do that, but I still do this on my fingers all the time. So for instance, Mike is working from 8:30 to 11:30. How many hours did he work? Okay, so here in my brain, I'm going to put 8:30, and then the first hour that passes, okay, that's the first finger, that's to 9:30. Second hour passes to 10:30. Third hour passes, that's to 11:30. Okay, so we look at this, and we got 1, 2, 3 fingers. That's 3 hours. Okay, pretty simple. Let's look at our next example. What if he worked from 8:15 to 11:30 this time? So we're still going to take that starting time, and that's what starts in our brain. Now we know, though, we're not going to be able to count in hours all the way to 11:30. We're just going to be able to go to 11:15. So the first hour is to 9:15. Second hour is to 10:15. The third hour is to 11:15. And then we have to stop because we can't do a fourth hour to 12:15 because he stopped at 11:30. So then we just have to ask ourselves between 11:15 and 11:30, how much time passed? Well, that's equal to 15 minutes, or as I prefer, 0.25 hours. Okay, so we're going to take that and we're going to add it. So we've got these 3 hours, okay, and we're going to add it to our 0.25 hours extra. So he worked a total of 3.25 hours, okay, or 3 hours and 15 minutes. But I, again, would prefer 3.25 hours. Because when you're then being asked to calculate how much did he make, let's say if he gets paid $10 per hour, you have to have done the calculation with this. Like the section we did in 3.2, you must be using the decimal notation because obviously we can't do it with this. It becomes very confusing. All right, example 4. If Mike worked from 8:30 to 11:15, okay, so now we're doing 8:30 to 11:15. How many hours did he work? You'll see I'm just always highlighting just for myself. It's always good to do. So I put 8:30 in my brain, 8:30 to 9:30. Also, I always start counting on my thumb. Some people start with their pinky. I don't really care what you use, but that's why I'm going thumb up. I just thought I'd mention that. One person asked me one time why I'm starting with the thumb. I always start with the thumb. So our first hour is 8:30 to 9:30. Our second hour is 9:30 to 10:30. He doesn't work for a third hour though, right? Because 11:30 is past 11:15. So we have to ask ourselves then from 10:30 to 11:15, how much time was that? Okay. Well, we know from 10:30 till 11, just 11, is going to be 30 minutes. And from 11 to 11:15, that's 15 minutes. So that is equal to a total of 45 minutes or 0.75 hours. And that's what you're going to add. So here, you've got 2 hours for sure. And then you're going to add 0.75 hours, okay, which gives you a total of 2 hours. Oops. Let me just erase that. It's not in the right spot. Oh, no, thank you. There we go. Gives you a total of 2.75 hours, okay, which is the way I would like you to show me, or 2 hours and 45 minutes, okay? But please, 2.75 hours, much nicer. Okay. I think last example for this section. Oh, 2 more. Okay. Example 5. If Mike worked from 11:15, okay, so now these are getting longer, to 3:30, how many hours did he work? We do the same thing. So, except this time he's starting at 11:15. So we're going to count the hours. So first hour is to 12:15. Second hour would be to 1:15. Third hour, 2:15. Fourth hour, or yeah, 4th hour, 3:15. Now we have to stop here because he worked till 3:30. So we can't count anymore. So this is our 4 hours for sure. And then from 3:15, that's supposed to be a 1, 3:15 to 3:30, okay, he worked, that's 15 minutes or 0.25 hours, okay? So you're going to add that 0.25 and you're going to end up with a total of 4 hours and 15 minutes or 4.25 hours, okay? So 4.25 hours, that's supposed to be an S, or 4 hours and 15 minutes. You don't need to write the word and in there. I don't know. I don't know why that's happening. Okay, 4 hours, 15 minutes. Okay. Next one. So if an employee is working a split shift, and this does sometimes happen, it kind of sucks, but if you work 2 shifts on the same day, you need to add your 2 shifts together, okay? So we're going to look at 8:30 to 11:30, and then 1:15 to 5. So how many total hours did he work? So we're going to do the first one from 8:30 to 11:30. We'll do that first, okay? So he starts at 8:30. First hour is to 9:30. Second hour is to 10:30. Third hour is to 11:30. Perfect. So here we've got 3 hours, okay? And we're going to need to add that to his second shift here. So his second shift was from 1:15 to 5 p.m. Okay? Now 1:15 is where we're going to start this time. So our first hour would be 2:15. Our second hour would be 3:15. Our third hour would be 4:15. Okay? And then 4:15 to 5, so that's not a full hour. We can't count it on our fingers, but we can figure out that that is going to be 45 minutes, okay, or 0.75 hours. So here he worked a total of 3 hours plus 0.75 hours, okay? So his total for the second shift would be 3.75 hours. Now we're going to take both of these and we're going to add them together. So our total for the day would be 3.0 plus 3.75. So he worked a total of 6.75 hours in the day. Okay? Yay. Okay, awesome. So that's the end of this part here. Now, again, this is really not a lot of questions. I'm just going to have you please do all of these, okay? It's good practice. It shouldn't hopefully take you too long to get through this assignment. It's just 1 page. So please do 3.3, work through all of them. Okay. Now, if we look at 3.4 next, this is where it gets really important that we can do this. So time cards. So employers, sometimes they use time cards to keep track of when employees are working, and you either keep track of your hours and write them down as you go, and then you submit them to be paid. Okay, so you have to make sure you keep track of your hours. So if this is Antonio's time card, we need to know what his total hours for the week are. Okay, so total hours for the week. Now, that's what they want to know in A. They want to know total hours for the week. So calculate the hours for each day worked and write as a decimal. So if in your head it makes more sense to do it with the clock method, but you just have to make sure you write them as a decimal for adding, okay? So starting at 9:15, I'm not going to draw a hand and write this out, but I'm going to talk you through like I would be counting on my hand. So 9:15 is where we start, 10:15 is the first hour, 11:15 is the second hour, so 2 hours, and then 11:15 to 11:45, that's 30 minutes. Now, if I want that as a decimal, which I do, and I'm going to do that right away. That's 2.5 hours. Okay. Tuesday, he worked 8:45 to 11:30. So let's start at 8:45 in our head. 9:45 is the first hour. 10:45 is the second hour. And then, so there's 2 hours. And then from 10:45 until 11:30, that's 45 minutes. Okay. So again, change it right away. 2.75 hours. You can write hours or not. Wednesday, he worked from 1 to 4:30. So we start with 1 in our head. 2 is the first hour. To 3 is the second hour. To 4 is the third hour. So we were 3 hours and 30 minutes. Okay, as a decimal, 3.5. And then Thursday, 8:30 to 12:45. So 8:30 to 9:30 is 1 hour, 10:30, 2 hours, 11:30, 3 hours, 12:30 is 4 hours. And then 12:30 to 12:45 is going to be 15 minutes. Okay, so that as a decimal is 4.25. And last but not least, Friday he worked from 9:30 till 1. So 9:30 till 10:30 is 1 hour, 11:30 is 2 hours, 12:30 is 3 hours. So 3 hours from 9:30 till 12:30, and then 12:30 to 1, that is going to be 30 minutes again. So 3.5 hours. So if we're going to find a total here, we're going to plug these guys into the calculator. We're going to add them up. Definitely use a calculator. You should come out with 16 hours or 16.5 hours. Okay? Or 16 hours and 30 minutes. But part B is asking us how much he made based on that total. So in part B, sorry, I'm just going to scroll down here. It says if he earns $14.60 per hour, how much did he make that week? So what we need to do is either use a proportion or you can multiply the number of hours worked by his wage. I'm just going to stick with proportions because those always work out nicely. Okay, so we're trying to figure out if he made $14.60 in 1 hour, and that's the proportion we're given, how much money is he going to make when he works that week? Now we know that week he worked 16.5 hours. Okay, this is why it's really important to have a decimal. If you had put 16.3 for 16 hours and 30 minutes, it will be wrong. So we cross multiply, so we multiply our pair, divide our spare. Okay, so x is going to be equal to 1460 times 1650 divided by 1. And that is going to be equal to $240.90. And just a reminder here for this, you are only going to go to 2 decimal places. Okay, so 2 decimal places because that's all you get for money. All right, so you have assignment 3.4. You have a couple of these. I would definitely like you to do, let's have a look here. Sorry, it's probably kind of dizzy. Definitely do number 1. Let's look at number 2. Definitely do number 1 and number 2. And then number 4. Okay, so number 1, 2, and 4. Don't worry about number 3. Or you can do it if you want extra, but I'd like you to do number 1, number 2, and number 4. Okay? All right, that's all for section 3.4. We're going to be kind of flying through this section. Please remember, I'm just going to remind you if you're listening to contact me if you ever need any help with this stuff. Okay, guys? We can do one-on-one. I think we're allowed to use Zoom now, so I can Zoom one of you or a couple of you if you need help. And yeah, hope you guys are all taking care. All right, bye for now.